Picture this. You're cruising down the highway, and out of nowhere, the sky just turns pitch black. A total, torrential downpour hits. For a terrifying split second, you're driving completely blind. But then, you flick a switch. A simple rubber blade swats the water away, and just like that, your vision is back. It's an everyday, completely relatable experience, right? Well, today, in this explainer, we're zooming in on that unsung hero, a piece of everyday tech you rely on but probably never give a second thought to.
Because as it turns out, the solution to this universal driving problem has a surprisingly dramatic past. Honestly, when you dig into the history of the windshield wiper, it isn't just a story about pushing water off a piece of glass. No, you uncover this massive, hidden saga. We're talking forgotten pioneers, massive corporate giants, and obsessive, decades-long legal battles that literally destroyed families. Let's get into it.
Okay, let's dive right into this timeline, because the early evolution of this tech was incredibly fast. Back when cars were just becoming a thing in the early 20th century, driving in the rain or snow was, frankly, incredibly dangerous. The very first functional wiper? Patented back in 1903 by a woman named Mary Anderson. She actually designed this manual, lever-operated rubber blade after watching a streetcar driver in New York totally struggling in an icy rainstorm. Fast forward a bit to 1917, and Charlotte Bridgewood takes it a step further, patenting the first electrically powered wiper using rollers. And then, boom, 1926 hits, and the corporate heavyweight Bosch launches their super reliable electric blade. It completely changed the game.
Now, zooming in on Mary Anderson and Charlotte Bridgewood, you start to see a really common, somewhat frustrating theme in early invention. Both of these incredible innovators independently identified and solved a massive safety problem for early motorists. But, and here's the kicker, neither of these pioneers actually managed to cash in on their ingenuity. They were largely ignored by the male-dominated auto industries of the time. Bridgewood even had this amazing name for her design, the Electric Storm Windshield Cleaner. It used rollers instead of blades, but unfortunately for her, the big manufacturers just kind of shrugged and didn't catch on to her specific mechanism.
And honestly, the timing here is just tragic. Bridgewood never really managed to get her design into full-scale production. Because of that, her patent protection quietly expired in 1920. Literally just 2 short years later, in 1922, massive car manufacturers like Cadillac started slapping automatic wiper designs on their cars as standard equipment. Bridgewood's groundbreaking work was completely swallowed up by the automotive boom. She was left totally uncredited and basically forgotten by history. It's heartbreaking, really.
So, with the individual pioneers kind of pushed aside, the corporate heavyweights stepped into the ring. In 1926, engineers over at Bosch decided they were going to perfect a simple, reliable, and compact electric wiper. But let me tell you, this was an epic puzzle. It was not as easy as just slapping some rubber onto some glass. If the rubber they used was too soft, it shattered. It became super brittle. But if it was too hard, it would literally burn out the massive, heavy motors they needed to drag it across the windshield. Oh, and they also had to balance the wiping pressure, which changed depending on where the arm was on the glass. Their huge breakthrough, they designed this brilliant, specific spiral spring that pressed the lever against the glass perfectly and evenly throughout the entire cycle.
Now, let's fast forward a bit. By the 1980s, the humble wiper had transformed into an absolute feat of high-end engineering. Mercedes-Benz rolled out the monoblade. People famously described it as a quasi-mesmerizing symphony of mechanical fluidity. I mean, what a description. If you've ever watched an 80s Mercedes E-Class or a 190E caught in the rain, you know exactly what they mean. It's this massive single wiper design that just captures this pure mechanical joy. It's got this total enthusiast vibe that still makes it legendary among car lovers today.
And this brilliantly illustrates the sheer engineering behind it. To get that peak performance without using 2 overlapping blades, Mercedes engineered this wildly complex cam-type hub mechanism. A simple basic arc wouldn't cover enough of the glass. So check this out. As the wiper sweeps, this hub device actually physically pushes the arm outward towards the corners of the windshield to maximize the clearing area. Then it actively pulls it back in at the very top of the arc so the blade doesn't just go flying past the roofline. It is literally a fascinating mechanical dance.
But of course, as with any dramatic piece of engineering, there were some pretty significant trade-offs. The big advantage of the monoblade was its aerodynamics. It massively reduced wind resistance when you were flying down the Autobahn at high speeds. But those highly specialized parts made it incredibly expensive to produce and a total nightmare to repair. And on top of that, having this single massive arm whipping back and forth so rapidly, it was so heavy that on its highest speed, the momentum actually shook the entire car. Yeah. Definitely not the smooth, serene luxury experience you'd expect, right?
All right, now we're pivoting to the true emotional climax of this explainer. And it's a story that actually begins with a freak tragedy.
Back in 1953, right on his wedding night, an inventor and mechanical engineer named Robert Kearns suffered a terrible accident. An errant champagne cork shot straight into his left eye. The injury was absolutely severe. It permanently altered his vision and left Kearns legally blind in that eye.
Fast forward exactly a decade to 1963. Kearns is just driving his Ford Galaxie through a really light rain. Now remember, at this time, windshield wipers were super basic. You had exactly two settings, on or off. That was it. So the constant, relentless, hypnotic scraping of these standard wipers back and forth across the glass deeply, deeply irritated his already sensitive, troubled vision. It's a relatable, super annoying driving experience for anyone. But for Kearns, that irritation actually sparked a revolutionary idea.
Kearns had this realization. He thought, why is this wiper operating like a dumb machine just continuously grinding away? It shouldn't. It should operate like human biology. He actually modeled his brand new wiper mechanism directly on the human eye. Think about it. Your eye doesn't blink continuously like a metronome. It blinks every few seconds to clear away moisture and then it rests. So Kearns took that exact logic and created the intermittent windshield wiper, a system that actually pauses between sweeps.
Now, what's really interesting about this is how Kearns' invention hinged on this fascinating yet brutal legal concept called the flash of genius. In patent law, this is a standard of originality that requires an invention to be a novel and non-obvious combination of parts. And this exact definition? This became the absolute legal battleground where Robert Kearns would spend the rest of his natural life fighting the big auto giants. He took his brilliant intermittent wiper to the big three automakers, fully hoping to just license it to them. And you know what? They all turned him down flat.
But then, out of nowhere in 1969, Ford suddenly rolls out electronic intermittent wipers on their Mercury line. And yep, they were using Kearns' design. So Kearns did what anyone would do. He sued. The auto industry's legal defense was incredibly aggressive and totally dismissive. Ford and Chrysler essentially argued that his patent was completely invalid because it lacked originality. They claimed he just slapped together a bunch of off-the-shelf electronic parts. To them, there was no true flash of genius. It was just an obvious combination that literally anyone could have made. That was their excuse for taking the tech.
But Kearns, he absolutely refused to settle for pennies. The guy famously acted as his own attorney for a huge chunk of this decades-long legal war. It was David versus Goliath against the unbelievably deep pockets of the automotive industry. It was incredibly grueling. But eventually, he won. After a massive verdict in 1992, Chrysler was ordered to pay Kearns roughly $30 million in compensation for patent infringement. Plus, he won over $10 million from Ford on top of that. Against all odds, he successfully defended his invention. So the crucial point here is looking at the personal costs for these inventors. They were starkly different, but honestly, equally tragic. On one hand, you have Charlotte Bridgewood, whose patent simply expired. She was left uncredited, essentially erased from the history books. On the other hand, you have Robert Kearns. Sure, he defeated the big three and won millions and millions of dollars. But the intense stress, the absolute obsession of those endless legal battles, it caused him to suffer mental breakdowns, it ultimately destroyed his 27-year marriage, and it deeply estranged him from his own children.
Now, while Kearns was fighting tooth and nail for the front windshield, a completely different engineering battle was quietly happening at the back of the car. The rear wiper evolved in a totally different way. Because of the aerodynamic vacuum that gets created right behind a moving vehicle, that back window faces some really unique challenges. It essentially sucks up heavy dirt, sticky road grime, and piles of snow. To fight that, engineers had to develop highly advanced, incredibly compact motors that could push those heavy loads while still operating silently. Today, they even have their own intermittent speeds and specialized heating elements just to melt off winter ice. Let's move ahead and see how this builds into the future, because today, we are miles beyond simple rubber and springs. The modern windshield is basically a fully integrated tech ecosystem. You've got rain sensors, detecting moisture and activating the wipers completely hands-free. And looking forward, the Internet of Things is stepping in, integrating these systems with weather apps, so your car can proactively adjust to rainfall in real time. Plus, with the massive rise of electric and fully autonomous vehicles, engineers are developing advanced materials and sleek aerodynamic designs to minimize drag and make sure the car's cameras and sensors always have a crystal clear view.
Which brings us to a final, somewhat provocative thought. The very next time you're driving in a sudden downpour and you hear that rhythmic swish of the wiper blades, take a second. Think about Mary Anderson, standing in the freezing cold watching that streetcar driver.
Think about Charlotte Bridgewood's forgotten electric rollers. And think about Robert Kearns, pacing a courtroom for decades, fighting for something as simple as the blinking of an eye. Who truly owns an idea? And how much hidden, forgotten drama sits quietly right there on our windshields every single time it rains? Keep exploring, guys, because I promise you, you will find the most incredible stories hidden right in the most ordinary places.